Hello, and welcome to another podcast by Asian Agribiz. I'm Isa Q. Tan. Today, our regional correspondent from Vietnam, Ha Tu, will speak to swine veterinarian John Carr on how pig producers can repopulate despite the presence of African swine fever. What are the risks involved in repopulation, and what should farmers do to minimize these risks? Is an ASF-free zone possible in a country where the virus is endemic? Dr. Carr is a well-known swine consultant in Asia, Australia, North America, Europe, and Africa. He specializes in maintaining pig health, promoting excellence in stockmanship and production practices. A frequent and popular conference speaker, he is also a lecturer at universities in the UK, the US, and Australia.
Hello, Dr. Carr. Thank you for accepting the talk for this podcast.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
Let me start with a personal question. If you are a farmer and say your farm was hit by ASF and market price is good now, would you dare to repopulate?
Absolutely. And I say absolutely without hesitation. There was obviously caveats. But the vast majority of pig farmers are pig farmers. They don't do very much else. I do appreciate that there are small holdings who may have multiple species, but the bottom line is that professional pig farmer of today, that is what we do. I mean, I'm a pig veterinarian. To do cattle and horses would be difficult. I'd have to think about retraining. So, in some respects, we have the skill set. But the number one reason why I would repopulate, restart, and try to recover is the world loves pork. And we've got a lot of people to feed.
How long do you think is a safe breaking time for restocking?
This is a very interesting question. And I think it would probably vary depending on whether we're looking at a breeding farm or a finishing farm. When we first started to have major problems with African swine fever, we were expecting a 9-month empty period. This became more like 6 months. And now, with thorough cleaning, I would expect about a 3-month empty period. The first thing to do is to remove all the pigs. Then you've got to remove all of the pig products. So that basically means all of the pig species, but also needles, syringes, food, anything that is potentially contaminated with this African swine fever virus. I would plan on a minimum of 3 months so that you remove the pig and the pig products, and then you clean. And I would normally do a thorough clean at least twice, if not really 3 times. And this would include a period of fumigation and intensive disinfection. And this is underneath the slats as well. So all the slurry is removed and then treated. You've also got a little bit of a problem as to where to put some of these products on the farm. One of the disinfection products that I use is calcium oxide, lime, which is very cheap. But the big advantage is that you can actually see where you've put it, because it is white. And so what I do is I would thoroughly clean the buildings, and then I would lime wash the buildings. And the advantage of lime is that it gets very hot in the chemical reaction going from calcium oxide to calcium carbonate. And then it also, as I say, you can see it. And then what you need to do is have an independent auditor to come in and actually check that the building is actually clean. So now the building is clean. Now the building is rested. And after 3 months, and as I say, you've probably cleaned it 2, maybe 3 times, particularly if this is your first time of an African swine fever break, I would seriously consider 3 big cleans. But then you can't put animals straight in. You need to consider putting sentinels in. And these sentinels need to wander around the whole farm. in all of the buildings, in all of the passageways. They need to examine and check the floors. And this takes another month. And then, assuming that the sentinels, and the major problem with the sentinels is the sentinels themselves have to be free of African swine fever. One of the mistakes that I've seen happen in Asia is the sentinels came from a positive farm or got infected en route. You must make sure that these sentinels are both PCR negative and antibody ELISA negative. So the sentinels spend a month effectively looking for the virus on the farm, assuming the sentinels A, live, B, do not produce antibodies to African swine fever, and obviously demonstrate no PCR positive to African swine fever. Then the sentinels can be removed, and then you've got your new animals coming in. So you can see this is a very time-consuming exercise. And unfortunately, one of the problems that I see in a lot of clients in Asia is that people are rushing. They're desperate to get back into pigs because we're pig farmers. We love pigs. But please do not rush. Take your time. Do a thorough job. The major problem we have in Asia is ensuring that the pigs that we are going to put in again are African swine fever free. And this is going to be a major challenge.
In Vietnam, farmers are reluctant to repopulate, although the government is trying to encourage them. The reason is that after ASF has devastated the sow herd, there's a severe scarcity of piglets, and thus the piglet price is extremely high now. That lowers farmers' profit. But most importantly, they are afraid of reinfection. And there's an unofficial data say that the average ratio of ASF reinfection in Vietnam is more than 50%. So what do you think about this?
Vietnam is obviously an interesting country, but Vietnam is also an interesting scenario. When you repopulate, there are some rules which you've got to consider. Now, I said initially that would I repopulate? The answer is yes. Would I repopulate using the same management style? Possibly no. The number one reason why farms in Vietnam and elsewhere in Asia reinfect is that the pigs they're bringing in are not clean. And they are not testing enough. And then it comes down to, do we have a nucleus concept? And Vietnam is just one example, but this is classic in China. It's classic even in Russia and the Ukraine, Romania, with smallholders. If you can't acquire negative pigs, you can't repopulate.
Okay, so to be more specific, what do you think an infected farm should do to prevent reinfection? Let me start with what is the first thing to do when an outbreak occurs at a farm?
Well, it's already too late because you're finished. In my experience, I appreciate there are partial depopulations, the tooth extraction concept in China. I have done that with success in the Philippines. But I've also done it and failed many times, as in we tried, but the reality was we failed. And I think in the long term that partial depopulation is not the way forward for control of African swine fever. The control of African swine fever must happen before you're positive. And the major problem we have is pigs coming to the farm. The problem that a lot of farmers have is they don't necessarily think about the pig the way that I would as a veterinarian. A pig is pig meat. I go to Vietnam, I have wonderful dinners with great friends. And I've been to pig farmers where they've brought pork from their own farm to a pig farmer, and we've shared his pork with his pork. But we can't do that. And the dinner occurs right next door to the farm where live pigs are. I mean, all it sounds like very good intentions, fantastic. But the reality is that African swine fever can survive a degree of cooking. It can certainly survive smoking. We eat a lot of pork relatively raw or raw. I mean, the prosciutto from Italy is raw. It's not cooked at all. It's just smoked and hung for a little while. And African swine fever is more than happy to live, and classical swine fever, but we're worrying about African swine fever, is more than happy to live in that type of product. When I look at pigs, I'm looking at feces. I've seen farmers visit another farmer, and their boots are filthy. And then they start toasting each other, and then they go and look at each other's pigs. Not wearing farm clothing, just wearing clothing off the street. I have a farm in Vietnam. I tried to keep the farm negative, only to find that the feed truck had driven right into the center of the farm, and the guys were unloading the feed truck into the feed bay. And I said to them, "You can't do this." And they said, "You can't expect us to carry the food from the perimeter." The answer is yes, you can. The food is not the problem, but the truck had feces on it from the last pig farm that they delivered food to. I mean, the pig farmer must realize that African swine fever is extremely small. Now, it's actually a very difficult organism to move. From the pig point of view, it will only move about 3 meters. So, when the pig coughs and defecates, has diarrhea or whatever, the virus doesn't move very far from the farm. But unfortunately, it is very pervasive in all the body excretions. Saliva, feces, potentially sperm, although I've never really documented a case of AI transmitting African swine fever. But the African swine fever virus is in a lot of body secretions. And we, as human beings, act as a vector. African swine fever has no impact on us. It doesn't make us sick. It doesn't do anything to us. But we can act as a vehicle. If our feet are not clean, our hands are not clean, we will easily carry African swine fever to the next farm.
So your point is that the reinfection rate is high because of low biosecurity. Yes. And more importantly, because of the bad old habits.
Yes.
That some farms have. Okay, so the main problem can be solved by changing the habit?
Yes. You've got this. The farms where I've changed people's habits have never broken with African swine fever. The farms who refuse to comply always re-break with African swine fever, assuming I can find negative pigs. But assuming I can find negative pigs, and there's still a lot of negative pigs even in Vietnam, but there are still a lot of negative pigs on the planet. But if you do not change your behavior, you will break with African swine fever again. It is that pervasive in the environment at the moment, in the society at the moment. Environment's the wrong word, because it's not really in the soil. It's not in the water as such. It's not in the feed. So they are not major risks. The water supply is a slight risk because people will unfortunately put dead bodies in the river. And it is the easiest way to transmit African swine fever is for a pig to drink African swine fever infected water. So please do not throw dead bodies into rivers, because if you're then taking the water from downstream, it's a very good way of breaching your biosecurity. But all the farms that I look after do not break with African swine fever if they comply with the rules. And I'm saying this with some confidence because I've dealt with African swine fever for over 10 years as a major clinical problem. I mean, Asia is only just starting. If you go to Europe, and particularly Russia, Ukraine, these countries have had African swine fever since 2007, 2010. So we've had 10 years of experience in dealing with this.
I want to talk a bit about the possibility of compartmentalization or an ASF-free area. To my understanding, compartmentalization is different from zoning, as it relies on the management and biosecurity rather than geographic isolation. Do you think compartmentalization can be achieved in areas where the backyard farming is still playing a major role?
If the backyard farm is negative, yes. I mean, these words like compartmentalization and zoning, I find difficult to understand, to be honest. You could argue that Australia is a compartmentalized place, as in it is one continent, but it is one country which we are free of African swine fever. Vietnam, 3 years ago, was a compartment free of African swine fever. Due to poor, and I use that word cautiously as such, poor border controls, Vietnam introduced African swine fever into its farms. Because of the social structure of the farms in Vietnam, the social structure of the people in Vietnam, the relationship between pigs and people, and unfortunately the relatively small size of the farms, and therefore inherently no biosecurity, because let's be real, no biosecurity, African swine fever went ripe. It just ripped through the whole country as a plague. It was going to do nothing else. We all knew this. We all prayed that Vietnam could stay free, but how can you stay free when you've got such a large porous border with a positive country? But Thailand is managing to stay free, and that is equally bordering a very large border with some positive countries as well. And we all hope and pray that Thailand manages to maintain its status.
I think during your work, have you experienced with farms that have successfully protected their herds against ASF?
Yes.
How did they do that? Can you share with us the story?
Cost you a lot of money. Yes, I mean, one tries not to be arrogant about this. And it's not the farms that John looks after, but the farms that I look after do not suffer from African swine fever, despite being in the middle of African swine fever major outbreaks. And we have lost farms, and I can tell you about some of those farms. And in truth, we lost farms because of stupidity. There was no rhyme or reason why we lost the farm, apart from the fact that we were stupid. And there's no point trying to blame somebody else. The bottom line, what we've tried to do is create an air gap between the farm and the outside world. So you have to sit down with the farmer and design a perimeter. And we now would have two perimeters. So we'd have a perimeter between the off-farm, and then I'd build another perimeter to the on-farm. And ideally that gap would be about 50 meters. Now, I've already ruled out almost every village pig in Asia, because the pig does not have the farmer does not own 50 meters around his farm. But if you can create an air gap, so you have the concept, we can always provide drawings and things for the listeners to the podcast, but you have the outside world, and the truck comes to the edge of the farm. So the truck delivering the food comes to the edge of the farm. The food is then transshipped by a farm truck to the sides of the building. When pigs leave the farm, they leave the finishing unit, for example. They are then transshipped to the perimeter of the farm, where an off-farm truck will come and pick them up. This is very different from the way that majority of farms run today, where the finishing guy will come and and come right the way to the edge of the finishing building, maybe even go into the finishing building to help the guy help the farmer unload or load the pigs onto his truck. And he might pick up 5 or 6 different loads before he gets to the slaughterhouse or the market. The feed likewise is delivered straight to the side of the building, or maybe to a little feed store. But the guys from the truck will unload the truck, walk all over the feed area. The guys on the farm will be walking all over the feed area. Everybody will shake hands, give themselves a hug. Then they go and have some tea. Then they maybe share some pork from each other's farms, and maybe even Granddad's farm, because why not? And then everybody drives away. And then 2 weeks later, we have a major African swine fever outbreak. This has to stop. And I feel heartily for village pigs, for people who have 1 or 2 pigs. For them, their chance of staying free could be high if they are remote. But if they are surrounded by 10,000 other guys in Hanoi who also have 2 pigs, then there is no chance. Once the disease comes into that group of pigs, it just sees one farm. It just sees all of those pigs as belonging to one farm, and it just takes them out. But I've had farms within 50 meters of a village that were decimated, and my farm never got sick because we had these 2 perimeter fences. The pigs were not able to get to the side of the building. And in some respects, as sad as it is, once all the village pigs have gone, my commercial farm's healthier because all the local pigs have disappeared, which is terrible. But we've had this is stories from the Ukraine. We've had village pigs come back and go and get African swine fever again, and my farm has stayed still healthy. And what I've tried to do is talk to the village pigs, the village people, and we would provide them with pork. We'd provide them with pigs, because then at least we feel that if they buy our pigs, we know that our pigs are African swine fever free. And so therefore, we buy our pigs, the farmer has a better chance. But his brother goes to the market and just picks up a pig up at the market. And then you still have wild pigs. And, Suscophora is a very, very successful creature. She is very capable of living anywhere in Asia. There is nothing in Asia that worries her, apart from human beings shooting her. But if a pig escapes from the buildings, it'll live quite happily for 20 years outside, snooting around. So I promised to tell you a couple of our stupid infections. The most stupid, which took out 3 farms, I'll tell you 2 stories that were really stupid. The most stupid was in Russia, a big nucleus farm, 2,000 sows. The guys saw a wild pig dead in the field about 50 meters away. So they go outside the farm. The pig was fresh. So they butchered the pig and then brought back the meat onto the nucleus farm and ate it. And sadly, the nucleus farm then broke 10 days later. They saw a dead pig just outside their farm, and they went because they liked the taste of wild boar. So that is probably the most stupid. And then the other examples I can give is we had a fan, which is something that the listeners could be interested in. We had a ventilation problem. One of our fans wasn't working. So you phone up an electrician and you tell the electrician to come out and fix the fan. So he came out and fixed the fan, and 10 days later, this farm is very biosecure with my double perimeter fence and everything else. And this farm 10 days later broke with African swine fever. I was furious, could not understand what mistake we'd made. And then we talked through with the guys, what happened? Who was on the farm? So then eventually they said, Harry was on the farm. He came to fix a fan. His name wasn't in the visitor's book. I have to assume he showered, but maybe he didn't. But he brought his own electrical cable, his own extension cable. And when we went to visit Harry, his extension cable was filthy, and he never cleaned it. And we then found out that he'd visited the day before a farm that then broke with African swine fever a few days later, maybe 4 hours, but whatever. And we reckon that when he was on the other farm, his electrical cable had picked up feces from farm 1. He had then brought that electrical cable and the feces to our farm. The pigs, either aerosol or maybe the pigs went in the passageway or people's feet, moved the infected feces into our pigs, which then died. And I lost 16,000 finishing pigs because of that. Where now, the big problem with Asia and Asia's love of pork is that the large commercial farms I can protect fairly easily. To put this into some perspective, if your farm has less than 200 sows, you probably have a 90% chance of breaking with African swine fever. And if your farm has more than 500 sows, you have a 10% chance of breaking with African swine fever. Biosecurity. You have the money. None of my big farms, apart from being absolutely stupid, like the stories I've just described, none of my commercial farms in African swine fever countries have broken with African swine fever. These two examples were, the nucleus farm was that they brought the pork on was a breeding farm, and we had to depopulate and start again. The other farms were finishing units. So the breeding farm was still safe, but we lost finishing pigs, and then had to clean the farm and start again. Still costly, but doable.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Dr. Carr, for your sharings.
As you've just heard, repopulation after ASF is possible. To ensure success and sustainability, pig producers must bear in mind the role of biosecurity. Most importantly, they must let go of old and incorrect production habits. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Before we go, we'd like to invite you to join us in Asian Agribiz's Pig Industry Conference in 2021, which will focus on how to live with ASF. For more details on the conference and to download this as well as our other podcasts, please visit our website at www.asian-agribiz.com. Once again, this is Isa Q. Tan saying thanks and inviting you to join us in our future podcasts.
Hi, I'm David Faulkner. What an informative podcast about African swine fever. So how can Asia's pig industry learn to live with African swine fever? Asian Agribiz is dedicating its 2021 Pig Industry Conference to a program delivered online that tackles this problem head on. There are three major objectives. Firstly, to bring you the latest ASF management initiatives from the US, Europe, and across Asia. Secondly, to identify the critical success factors necessary to protect your farm and your customers' farms, and also to show you how to adopt technologies, nutritional strategies, and management techniques critical to the future of our industry. It's an exceptional program bringing together 14 experts from the US, Europe, and across Asia. So to keep you safe from that other virus, COVID-19, Asian Agribiz will deliver this program online in 4 2.5-hour sessions on 4 consecutive Thursday mornings, starting from the 25th of February 2021. A Q&A session will be held at the end of each day, where the speakers will field your questions. So to see the full program and to register, simply follow the prompts on asianagribiz.com. Please join us.